This is Self-Directed Research. James and Amos are back with hyper-focused deep dives. James is up this week with Typst is Pretty Neat. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find us. And as always, visit sdr-podcast.com/episodes for all the presentations, videos, show notes, and transcripts. Stay tuned to the end to hear more about Depot, the sponsor of this episode.
Cool. Trying a slightly different mic position. Hopefully that's not an issue.
I need something to go with my ask for the audience. I just need to have like a big red band over here that's just like, don't look over here. Just don't.
Right.
No head turn further than like face the camera.
There's a scene in Orange Mécanique. I forget the name of the English name of the movie.
Orange?
Clockwork Orange. Mm-hmm. Where he's like this, and they make him look at things. I don't know what they're making him look at. I forget, but you should put whatever that is where you shouldn't look. Whatever. Well, if you had the big
Let's put a jump scare over here.
You should put those on and crank up the gain, because then if you plosive, you will hear it immediately. It will punish you.
That's fair. I have no immediate feedback because it's distracting and it breaks my train of thought.
Really? Well, with any delay, yes. But with direct monitoring through the USB interface,
It's probably just a habit. Because I never have it, I'm not used to it. I'm sure if I did it for a week, it would make sense. Or if I recorded as many videos as you have, it would. But...
Well, I don't have feedback when I record videos because I'm just standing below a boom mic. But yeah.
I think I just need a boom mic is probably what I need.
No, not for this.
On a big fuzzy shotgun. Just mount it to...
No. Oh, yes. Okay, yes, but only if you treat your entire room acoustically.
Oh, okay. Are you telling me that the hard plastic and wood...
Doesn't have enough sound dampening material?
No, but
I just need to put crushed velvet all over everything.
It's not as bad as where I record, where it's mirrors and glass.
Mm.
So wood is already not that bad.
Do you record in a dance studio?
I will show you my studio eventually. No. It's just a room, but it has those big open windows.
You have like hard walls and stuff.
Yeah, and hard walls. And it's not even a cube because the roof is at an angle because it's right below the roof. The ceiling is at an angle.
I have a friend who's like an audio and mastering engineer, and he built a like shed studio for himself, and they actually built the walls not at 90-degree angles on purpose because it's better for diffusing. So like he treated the whole room, but also all the walls are at like slightly like 5 degrees off on purpose.
That's a good shirt idea. 5 degrees off on purpose. I don't know.
Merch.
All right. This is an episode where I am more excited than informed. Are you ready, Amos?
That is the whole entire idea of this podcast. I am so ready.
I feel like some days we're informed and reluctantly excited, and then some days we come firing in like, I learned a thing, and this is one of those days. Because last week I picked up a tool called Typst, which I've been having an eye on for a long while, but finally came up with a couple things that I needed it for, and it's that classic like I can't learn something new until I have like 2 specific projects that I need it for, because otherwise I'll just read all the docs for forever and go yeah makes sense and retain none of it. And then the moment that I have real projects to put together with, it's okay, now it sticks. So this is Typst.
I thought it was pronounced Typst, actually.
I don't know. This is one of those that I've never talked to someone in person about it, so I'm saying like type like type.
It is TYPST.
Yeah.
Just for the readers who are not reading the slides, available at sdr-podcast.com/episodes.
Well, I mean, they're based out of Berlin, so it might be Typst. I don't know. We'll see. But I think Typst is pretty neat. So as a TLDR for someone who hasn't heard of it before, Typst is basically a programming language for documents. And this isn't a particularly revolutionary thing. You might have heard of LaTeX before. LaTeX is one of those like, what is it? It wasn't Kernahan. It was the other C guy, but it's one of those. He made it in a cave out of a box of scraps. Like he was typesetting the it was Ritchie, I think, because it's K&R. It was when Ritchie was typesetting. I think one of the original textbooks was like
Knuth.
Oh, was it Knuth? You're right.
It was Donald Knuth who made tech.
Yeah. I'm forgetting my C language luminaries here, or I'm getting them muddled up. But yeah, it's one of those needed a typesetting tool, so wrote one. And basically the entire like university paper writer and a lot of professional bookmakers and stuff have been using something not terribly far out of the tech family. So it's spelled LaTeX, but I guess it's TEX, like tex, and then LaTeX is how I always see it. But I never really learned LaTeX, even because I never did a PhD in university, so I was never a researcher, and I never had to actually typeset anything seriously. So I've managed to go almost my entire software career using either graphical editors like Word or like Google Docs or whatever, or Markdown. Tremendous amount of my customers actually just prefer Markdown for even serious reports because they stick it in the docs folder of their repos, and then no one has to worry about losing it. And if I'm making architecture diagrams and stuff, it's great because it goes in the repo, or I end up copying and pasting it into their wiki or whatever I end up using it for. So,
And you can diff it and everything.
yeah. And so that's always the benefit of using Markdown over Word or DocX or just PDFs, really, is that it's easy to diff. And there are some tools for diffing PDFs, and there's change tracking, but they don't jive well with the normal software development practice. But yeah, these are languages that are used for typesetting. So you write your actual text, but you also write things like, hey, I want a table here with this many columns and this width of the column, or I want my margins to be this, my number of columns to be whatever. And it's a programming language, and it has a compiler, and you run the compiler on it. And instead of putting out a binary, it spits out a PDF or an SVG or whatever you'd like it to be. So these are interesting because they do sort of then come back around to the programming workflow where you can put them in a Git repo, and you can have shared components, and you can have all of these kind of things. And I've not ever used LaTeX, but have you, Amos?
I have, but I've never been a serious researcher either. I think the name for this podcast is a fraud. Neither of us have been researchers.
We're independent researchers.
We are.
We decided to do consulting instead of PhDs, so.
You floated this topic recently, and I said my own experience is through Lyx, Lyx, which was a WYSIWYG editor for LaTeX. What I think very funny about the history of tech, if I may interject for a second, is that
Yeah, go for it.
Knuth made it because the first, I'm gonna read straight up from Wikipedia, which is 50% of what making a podcast is. The first edition of his book was typeset using hot metal typesetting on a monotype machine. I have no idea what it looks like. It's a method dating back to the 19th century. It produced a classic style that he liked. And when the second edition was published, they had to typeset everything again because the monotype technology had been replaced by phototypesetting. And he looked at it. So from 68 to 77, they switched to a new typesetting system. And he looked at it and was like, I liked it better before. So he just made his entire typesetting system. And then if you're wondering the difference between tech and LaTeX, the lay part is mostly a set of macros. It's just tech is really just the maths behind it. And then you need to build kind of an ecosystem, a standard library or something of things you can use on there.
Yeah, because there's a whole bunch of plugins and things like that, and this is why it gets used in a bunch of scientific writing. One, like universities will typically have like a standard template so that everyone writing a paper uses the same template, and it gets imported like a macro or a library or something like that. And then same for graphs and tables and anything else that you put in there. So it has like a consistent looking, voice is the wrong thing to use for text, but a consistent looking style. And, that way, even if you have just PhD researchers, they end up with something that looks consistent for the university and stuff like that. But like I said, I only did my bachelor's, so I missed out on that. For my bachelor's, we didn't have a bachelor's thesis, but we had like a final project, and I think I just used Google Docs for that, if I remember correctly. Serious intent on that, but it was a much different audience than publishing in a research paper or something like that.
True. I do find it interesting that, unless I'm misreading this, and if I'm wrong, we will get emails about it, but I don't think it was out of it's not like the free software story. It's not like, I wanted to use a printer, I couldn't because software was fucky, so I just started a whole movement. It's more like there's nothing that can do this right. So it's not even about making it open or whatever. It's just like, I'm going to make my own because I know I can do this better.
This is like back in the Bell Labs days, right? Like this is when Knuth wasn't, I don't remember if Knuth was at Bell Labs, but I think it predates like LaTeX probably doesn't, but I don't know. I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I think it's older than that. But yeah, I do think it was one of those yak shaves of like, oh, well, there's no software for that, so I guess I'll just write an entire typesetting programming language, as you do.
Yep. I'm fact checking you as we go, and I see Stanford University, I see University of Oslo. I don't think he's part of the Bell Labs people.
Okay, like I said, I'm probably muddling up my C luminaries again.
Yep. Easy to get mixed up.
But also, if you've heard people talk about LaTeX, everyone I know who's used LaTeX also has complaints about LaTeX in that it is very like macro heavy. It's an artifact of its time, as far as I know, in that it's one of those things that it made sense at the time and it's just been grown and things added to it. And macros that were reasonable are less reasonable when you're a decade away from the person who wrote it, or people who are in university. It's like, well, who wrote the macros that our university uses? Some third-year undergrad student who is the only person who figured out how LaTeX worked and could write macros for it. And now if you ever have to debug it, it's horrible. Or, you know, I can't give that many directed complaints because I've never used it, so I'm not very informed. But every single person who I've talked to who has used LaTeX always has a love-hate relationship with it, in that they love what it's supposed to do, and then as soon as a table overflows or you have to debug a macro or you import two macros that interfere with each other or whatever, everything goes to hell. And the actual workflow that a lot of people require to get it working requires like, okay, I have to install 37 Perl packages and 2 Python packages and whatever, because I guess however these macros are written, there's just a lot of processing step. And one, it's a tool that people have used, but a lot of different people have used, and it's been this whole like bazaar of ecosystems. So it's, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's something that's always struck me as a love-hate relationship, that people love the idea of it and then just paper cuts all day, every day, which is part of the reason why I never picked it up, because every time I heard something good about it, I heard just as many complaints about it. And I went, I guess my Markdown's not so bad. Like I can do Markdown render to HTML or like Markdown render to PDF, and I can live with that.
Yeah, I definitely have heard the same complaints. And it is definitely a product of its time. There's so many more fun tidbits around it. For example, Knuth didn't just invent tech, he invented the concept of literate programming, where you essentially write a document and then you can compile a document to source code because it extracts the code that's in there. So explain what you do, and the prose, the explanation for humans is kind of the main thing, the main focus. And then the code is a product of that, is something you can compile. He originally wrote tech in a language called Web, WEB, all capital, and that produced programs in DEC, PDP-10, Pascal. Maybe a CDEC. So yes, it was released 47 years ago. It is old. It is extremely old in computer years.
Yeah, but this is Typst. And so LaTeX is LaTeX. Like I said, I never learned it, but this is Typst, which is a much more modern program. It's written in Rust, which always great. I love using tools that are written in Rust because it means that I have a chance in hell at debugging it in case something goes wrong, or just, you know, supporting people doing that. And it's actually local for me because it comes out of TU Berlin, which is one of the big universities here. And it started as a side project from a student in 2019, maybe one or two people. I know there are 2 main developers who are working on it now. And since then, they've been making it basically their full-time thing of building the command line version of it. Well, I'll get into the different forms that it comes in, but making the language itself and all the tooling that relates to it. And so it's something that I've had on my radar because in Rust, everyone talks about like, hey, I just built this new thing in Rust. So I've seen it on the like, you know, various announcements. And I think a year or 2 ago, I kind of looked at bringing it up because I was like, well, maybe I do want to do more formal reports for customers and stuff like that. So maybe I'll pick it up, but I didn't have anything at hand, which means I dropped it. And then I think like 6 months ago, I tried again because I found what I actually found was the NASA design and style manual. So someone just printed a PDF of it, and it's like the whole guide of how you do typesetting and logos and fonts and everything like that for NASA. And it was a really interesting style guide, and I was like, oh, I want to make pretty technical documents like that. Like there was a very cool style and inspiring style. So I started picking up Typst about 6 months ago because I was like, okay, if I want pretty like laid out documents like that with images set and, you know, all that, then I'm going to need something more powerful than Word or Google Docs or whatever. And so I sort of picked it up, did the tutorials, went really fine, but then I didn't use it. Went back on vacation and didn't touch it. But I recently got back into it because my company, One Variable, is going to Embedded World, and we need either a big poster or like one of those roll-up banners for it. And I was like, well, how do you design a 2 by 1 meter banner? Because I don't know how I would approach that in any of the tools that I know how to use, like Google Docs. I guess I could make a really big PowerPoint slide for it or something. I don't know, but it seemed like a perfect opportunity because we didn't need that much text and style because it's something you want to be able to see from like across the hall.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I wonder if Typst can just handle a 2 meter by 1 meter document. Absolutely no problem with it. I opened it up, did like hello world, and it rendered a giant PDF that looked perfectly fine at 300 ppi. And I was like, oh, cool. And then I think that was on a Friday, and I just sat the rest of the evening and was like, okay, how do I make a pretty gradient background, and just messed around with it, because it has this really nice what you see is what you get web editor. It's sort of like if you've ever seen any of those, like HackMD is one of those websites where you've got Markdown in one pane and you've got like pretty rendered version on the right side. Typst has the same thing. So you've got all your code on the left. It's even got like syntax highlighting, and it'll do autocomplete, sort of like a LSP sort of thing. So like it'll autocomplete things and you can hover over things and see it. And it caught me in exactly the right way, where I just spent like the next 6 hours like, okay, how do I make a title? Cool. How do I make a gradient? How do I make a shape on top of a gradient? How do I do stacking shapes? And just, it was fun to just play around with. So, I mean, it took having a very specific task to do. It was neat because I just had the editor open in one window and the docs open in another, and they have really good searchable docs. So I'm like, gradients, type gradient. And it's like, function gradient looks like this. Call it with these methods. And I was like, oh, cool. And you just paste that in and you iterate on it. So I have some very like some of the intermediate documents I made. I was like, okay, I am approaching the level of competency. So my documents now look like PowerPoint in the late 90s, because it had like, you know, big text, rectangle behind it, gradient as a background. Like, but over the course of like 6 hours, I went from like black text on white background to PowerPoint to something that I was like, okay, if we printed this, I wouldn't be ashamed to have it at my booth in like 6 hours, which was really, really neat.
So I wonder, because you're talking about gradients, and I'm trying to think of the whole pipeline, because rendering to a bitmap so that you can see it in your browser is easy. I'm wondering what's the thing they standardize on? What's the lowest common denominator? And I think it has to be PostScript, right? Because that's what you send to printers.
I have no idea.
And by printers, I mean both the physical device and the people whose job it is to print things. Because, well, I don't know either, but I have an interesting tidbit that TeX was released initially in 1978, so 47 years ago, but PostScript was released in 1982, which was only 43 years ago. So that means that for 4 years, TeX was the thing, but PostScript wasn't. And now PostScript is not even the thing people actually use. They use PDF, which has PostScript inside, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see.
PostScript's great. PostScript's a fourth. Well, it's not exactly a fourth, but it's basically a fourth, which is great. And that was back in the day when printers were big, expensive machines, and user terminals were dumb machines. So you would have basically a big beefy computer that was running the printer. So instead of sending it rasterized images because your network wasn't fast enough and your computer wasn't fast enough to rasterize the image. So rasterizing is like turning it from vectors into like a bitmap like we think of. So you would just send PostScript, which is a program, over the network to the computer that would then render in the giant RAM buffers that your printer had, because the printer was the expensive piece of equipment.
Wait, do people do code golfing with PostScript? Like, try to make a document in as few bytes as possible, because you can write PostScript by hand?
Someone's got to be doing code golfing with PostScript. I'm sure that's a thing. Yeah, so I don't know. I did look into a little bit how it works, because it is just a Rust crate. It renders into sort of, I'm sure it's like any other compiler. It has like a million intermediate formats, and so it renders into some document model. It does the rendering, and then you give it to the next step, which is either render to PDF or render to PNG or render to bitmap. And like I ended up using one, spoiler for later, that renders to like tiny Skia. So it creates essentially just like a bitmap image where it gives me an array of pixels. So I'm sure it has some plugin for like, okay, we get to the intermediate representation, the IR,
right.
with the document model and like things that have been applied and things that haven't. And then if you're going to PDF, you might apply those to create the PDF in one way, or to a PNG or a bitmap, you might do it a different way. I haven't looked really under the hood, just enough to plug it into some other stuff. But yeah, the web editor is super nice. Like I said, if you're looking at the slides now, I have an actual picture. So Amanda probably has had this picture on the slides if you're watching the video for the last 5 minutes we've been talking, instead of just the slide that says it has a nice GUI editor. But you can see exactly the slides we're looking at right now, basically. And you can see the text over on the left and a preview of the previous slide on the right. And it looks really nice. It's about what you would expect from a visual editor. But because it's still usable in all the places that LaTeX was, it also comes as a command line interface tool. So you just can type Typst, compile, input source file, output PDF or output PNG, and it'll just spit that out. And because it's in Rust, it runs stupidly fast and it's fairly instant. So I've done things like just run watch exec on this. So every time I hit save on the file, it immediately regenerates the PDF, which you can do with LaTeX as well, but it just is nice and snappy. Like I said, because it's in Rust, and I didn't mention it, but the entire thing's open source. I don't think their web GUI tool is open source. I'm not sure. But like the core engine and the language itself are open source, and now fairly recently published as a crate, which means you can just add it to your project. And I'll show you what I did with this, but it works pretty simply as well. Like you give it the text, it has this concept of a world that you need to give it, and that's how you handle like loading plugins and fonts and things like that. So you can make a really minimal one that has like the one font you need, and then you just do compile.
So I'm looking into their pricing to see what the model is, because it's always a question to ask. You find a tool, it's cool. The source is available, but especially now in 2025, in the wake of all the business source available license, BSL, I forget exactly the name, but there's a lot of software. The source is there, but it's not necessarily open source in the sense that you can't change it, you can't recompile it, you can't distribute the changes. So and also just you should be interested in the future of the software you use. And by you, I don't mean you, James, specifically. I mean everyone listening to this.
Anyone using a tool.
Exactly. So I think they're going for an open core model where the whole technology, because you have to reassure people. People are going to write a lot of documents with this. So they have to know that even if the company goes out of business, they still can do something with all that Typst source code. So that I think that's why it's open source. And also because then they get free contributions. But then I think what they're trying to monetize is the whole collaborative editing experience on the web thing and cloud storage and whatnot. So cloud storage itself is not enough. It's hard to make a living just selling that. It's Google Docs level of collaboration where many people can have the same document open at the same time. You see people editing. They're using CRDT under the hood to do that. So I think that's what they're going for. And I have no idea if they're profitable or not, but we'll ask them and get back to you. No, we won't.
Yeah, I know they've also gotten some funding from like some European grants and stuff, and I think from their university. Though going through those processes are always difficult, so I'm sure they're aiming to be profitable. I haven't talked to them, but yeah, it does make sense to me that like you have sort of this core engine that the really like tech focused people can just download the open source version and install it and run it. But if you want it to be more applicable to more industries, having a really nice collaborative editor, because you want this to be useful for teams that don't know source control. You want to be able to say, I have 10 accounts for the people in my newsroom and we can collaborate on this and we can kick out a newspaper every day or every week or something like that. So I definitely see that as being the like, you want people to go and run with it in open source, but then monetize the ones where it's like, hey, if you're a business using this, if I've used this for more than a week, we'll probably start looking into that because they also accept sponsors. So I know they have a GitHub sponsors. So if that's something that becomes a serious part of my workflow more than this slide deck and a couple of the other things that I'm going to show off, then chances are we'll probably.
So this slide deck is made with Typst.
Yep.
But the other ones were not.
No. So
just this one.
The history of my slides, I was using Google Docs for a while. And then after some of your presentations where you showed Keynote handling some stuff better, I started using Keynote and I went, oh, this is kind of nice. And then
I switched back to Google Docs.
You switched back to Google Docs, and now
I'm a real influencer. I'm like, everyone's doing this new thing, and then I don't use it.
And then now I'm switching over to Typst. So we'll see. I don't know if it's going to stick, but I aim to make it fairly similar. You probably can tell some difference between the two of them, but
I like the way it looks.
Because I was just eyeballing the font sizes and stuff, but the vibes are the same.
I might follow you on this one. We'll see.
Nice. So what does the actual source code look like? Especially for people who haven't, like myself, haven't done programming in LaTeX or whatever, so I won't be able to contrast this, but this is all of the source code necessary to render up to the first slide of this presentation. So a couple things are going on. Function calls typically happen with a £sign or a hashtag, and then the name of a function. But you can also set essentially like the default values to all of these by doing hash set and then the name of the function. So I type hash set page, and then I fill in a ton of parameters like the width of the page, the background fill, which is black, the margin that I want on the page. And then I can set the header here. And so I can actually put a chunk of code in here that is going to be rendered as the header on all of my pages. The other main like syntax thing that you'll see here is when you see square brackets, that's saying here's a chunk of text, basically. It's like almost like a closure almost for text. So it's saying like the header parameter here would take some text or some content here. And if I want to have a multi-line thing where maybe I call other functions and set some stuff, I put those inside of square brackets which will kind of encapsulate the thing that I'm running. So I can set alignment, I make a rectangle, and then in the rectangle, you can see one more piece of syntax. Most functions take content as their last argument, and you can either put it inside the parentheses of the function call, or you can put it as a square bracket immediately after the function call, and it becomes essentially the last parameter of that.
That reminds me of Ruby blocks. Have you done Ruby? Do you have any
No,
Ruby
I haven't.
experience? They have this weird thing that I've always hated, actually. I like when languages explicitly take closure. So I like Rust,
Yeah.
I like some others. I don't know what Python does. But for Ruby, you do, I forget the exact syntax, but you can pass a block to a function and it's not an argument, it's something else, and it has a weird syntax. And sure, it feels nice to write, but it's, I don't know. And this feels like the same thing. You can either, but you can have it both ways here, because you can either pass it as an argument or use that kind of square bracket block syntax, right?
Yeah. So you could also like save content off in a variable name. So if I was doing that, I might just pass it as the last argument to rectangle. Since I'm writing it inline, I'll probably put it after. And this is just saying, so like rectangle, when you give it content, it puts that content inside the rectangle. So this content that I'm putting there, I'm putting in a stack, which is basically like 3 things right next to each other. And the direction is left to right. So you could have TTB, which is top to bottom, or LTR or RTL or BTT, I guess. But I'm just saying, okay, I need the text, which is 24-point font that says self-directed research, a small rectangle, which just gives me some spacing between the text and the image, and then the image, and I'm telling it to scale that to the height, which is the height of the header, 100%. So I just say, okay, these are the 3 things that go in there. It's aligned right, and then these 3 things in this order.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
Everything makes sense to me in this code. But if you're listening to this podcast, you should be looking at this podcast. So go on YouTube or the website to get the slides, because it's really hard to just describe with sounds. But I'm looking at the slide that this produces, and I don't understand height 80% on the rectangle, because you're making a header. The width is 100%. I understand that. 80% of what? Because it's not...
Yeah, it's 80% of the parent context. So of the height of the header, the rectangle that's inside of it is 80%. And then those stack of 3 items then exist within the bounds of that rectangle.
So there's a built-in header thingy for pages?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah, I think there's a footer as well. But
Okay. So there's a preset size for headers that are part of every page that you just stuff the rectangle in there.
yep, exactly.
I see.
And I think I was actually looking how to tweak that. I don't know, because I'm only like 4 days into this. So I don't know how you change the size of the header, but I know that it obeys the margins of the page. So that's why I have my margins set so wide, is because I wanted the header to be over to
It's
the right.
interesting because it feels like you're building the page from first principles, like you're making rectangles and then alignments and everything, but also there's a hard-coded header and footer. Like those concepts are so deeply embedded into how we think about documents that they're just there by default. It feels like something they would have added to the standard library instead of baked in. I don't know.
Maybe. It's just how I don't know. Fair disclaimer. If you're more experienced than me, you're probably like, oh, why are you doing it like that? You really
Yeah.
are like, you're gluing rocks together at this point. So this is with like 3 days of actually working on this. But to the point where I know just enough to be dangerous. So I was able to put together a whole slide deck in one sitting for this. And then, so we come out of the page setup. I set some other stuff like, okay, I'm setting the align to center and horizon. So it's going to be aligned left to right center and also top to bottom center. My text is going to be white with the font departure mono on this size. And then I just start typing text like Typst line break is pretty neat. And we get that first slide where you get that over that. And then to make more slides, it's just hash page break parentheses, because each slide is a page. So from here on, it's pretty much just text.
So horizon is just horizontal alignment?
Yeah, it's horizontal center. It's
I
like
see.
the up-down version of center, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I built a GUI with eGUI recently doing immediate mode layout, and I had to
Yeah.
think about that for 1 week straight. So I have no spoons left. I will trust you on that one.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, the rest of the slide, it's got some other cool things, like it takes themes for... So I mean, like what we're looking at now is a syntax highlighted block, which is just text in my actual slides. And you can import themes, and it uses the .tm theme format, which Sublime takes as well. So I exported the Monokai theme that I use in my Sublime text editor, imported into that, And then all of a sudden now my slides code formatting looks exactly like my text editor does. And Amos won't yell at me anymore because I'm not taking screenshots of my text editor, which is great.
Yes and no. Yes and no, James. Yes, this is
Amos will still yell at us. Don't worry.
infinitely.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I don't yell. All right, I use my insight. Second of all, this is so much better, and I'm so happy for you, James. But it's still, I don't like text-made grammars because they're just basically regular expressions. And this would have been the status quo still today if the Tree Sitter project hadn't been made. And I wish I could credit the people. Give me one hot second to look up the people behind Tree Sitter. Who's responsible for? Because like they wrote actual parsers, they wrote actual grammars, and now you can have actual good.
They're also great because they're generated and they do one generated C file per language, which means some languages like Rust or Haskell and stuff end up generating like 90,000 line C files, and it makes the GitHub view of those files just fall over.
So the presentation, the initial presentation of Tree Sitter at GitHub Universe 2017 was by Max Brunsfeld, and I know we've interacted online before. Max, you're a real one. Thank you so much. James, try again. Do better.
I gotta look up. I don't know how Typst actually does code highlighting because it takes the TM theme option,
That's
but
true.
I don't actually know what the engine that it uses to do that.
Right. Maybe it's just taking the theme and not the actual grammars.
Yeah, I don't know, but it is also written in Rust, so I'm sure if we wanted to glue in Tree Sitter onto it, then they could.
Yeah, it would be surprising if they didn't actually.
Yeah, but like I said, I've learned just enough to become dangerous in it, and because this is how my brain works. Once I get a new tool, it's great because all these problems where I don't know how to solve it, my brain immediately starts applying it to that, even if it's not the best fit tool. But I've never had a tool for building like UI designs before. Which means even on embedded systems and stuff, I've always just been, bare minimum text and rectangles and stuff. My minimalism isn't some design principle. It's like, this is literally the best I can do. And somehow it looks clean and nice most of the time. And that project for me was I'm building a little e-paper display clock for my house.
That's so
and this
cute.
is built on all the PostStation stuff.
E-paper thingy you posted about was for.
Yeah. So I have PostStation, which is usually set up so that you have like a Linux computer running the show and you've got like devices out on the edge. So what I do is once a minute on my laptop, it generates this image. It knows that it's a 400 by 300 pixel black and white picture. And I use typesetting, and I actually fill in the time and whatever the values are, because in that screenshot before where I showed you building it as a crate, I can just use a Rust string and format in the numbers and words you see here.
Yeah.
And then take that formatted string, run it through Typst as a rendering engine, spit it out into a bitmap, compress it so I can put it over my wireless network, and then send the compressed black and white image to my device, which reassembles it, shoves it onto the e-paper display, and then puts the e-paper display back to sleep. So now I have this whole new world of user interfaces open to me because I've never learned HTML or CSS really. So now I have one tool in that field and I want to apply it to literally everything.
That's very fun. How do you deal with the well, you don't have user supplied input, so this is not a security problem, but I'm just curious, do you do formats, or do you have something more fancy to do the templating and actually replace placeholders with the current time, etc.?
So right now I just use format. I know Types itself, I'm not sure about it as a library, but as a language, it has some concept of being able to import documents. So you can import JSON content or TOML or YAML content and tell it to like query a field in a JSON document or a TOML document. So I think the idea is that you're able to like glue that to API requests or, other metadata. So there's probably a more clever way to do it. For me, the most expedient thing was format because it's just I'm taking from chrono, hour, and minute, and then using that, 2-digit padded, put it here kind of thing. But it does, as a language, have some ability, like I think at the compilation stage, you can tell it to load this JSON file and pull this, sort of like a JQ.
It has this concept of variables or environment or something or world,
So there's definitely room for that. It probably depending on how I was driving it. If I'm pulling it in as a crate, as a Rust library, I'd probably just have the Rust library do the smartness on that. If I was using it as a command line tool, it might be more amenable to scripting to say like, pull it. I'll make sure that I've prepared data.json, and then I tell it to pull this information out of data.json or something in my bash script before I call the compile step.
This is very cool. By the way, I just checked on the official website, and it is Typst. You are correct. There is the IPA in the crates page, which everyone should do, honestly. Just put the international phonetic alphabets of your name so people know how to pronounce it.
Nice. Yeah. This is where I'm at. I've been enjoying it heavily. We'll see in a couple more episodes if I'm still using this for this, but I am absolutely chuffed with it so far, and I wanted to share my excitement with you because I know we've talked a lot about layouting and how to get pretty content.
We have, and I have been doing some, like I said, I built an application with eGUI, and in my typical fashion, it's an article about something completely different, but I dedicate several pages to rendering a timestamp. So exactly like you have here. That's why my mind's thinking about that. You have 12:34, and I'm looking at it, and the colon is too wide. There's too much space on either end because you're just using a monospace font, which is the second best thing you can do. And you like this font. But for me, I wanted to have consistent spacing and not have the numbers jump around when the time changes. But 1 is narrower than 7, which is narrower than 8, etc. So there's an entire section in one of my articles just about rendering timestamps correctly with serif non-monospaced fonts. And it made me think of that.
I was to say, I haven't gotten to messing with the kerning of anything yet, but I know it's possible.
Would you? I don't know if maybe you pretend to like this font just because it's monospace, and that makes everything so much simpler.
Little column A, little column B.
But Typst is interesting for this because, like you mentioned, Tiny Skia. Skia is the, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the rendering library. Think of it as HTML5 canvas, but that's actually what backs that in Chromium, I believe. There's two competing ones. There's like Cairo, which is the GTK thingy, and Skia, I think, is the one from Chromium. And Tiny Skia is a subset that drops a bunch of features that are hard to implement. Like it's an 80-20% thingy. They drop like the 20% of features that were responsible for 80% of the code, and so it's all safe Rust and only slightly slower, something like that. And nice. That gives you, like, you can do text rendering, you can render gradients and various shapes. The round ones are the hard ones to render. But then you still have to do the typesetting, you still have to do the layout. And I'm assuming that's where Typst actually comes in. And it makes a ton of sense. I've been wondering how I can generate open graph previews for links for my website with like the title and the description and everything. And I think Typst would be actually great for that.
I think it'd be perfect for that, yeah.
Because you can generate an SVG as well, because some browsers support that. So you can serve both.
Yeah, built in they have export to PDF, SVG, and PNG. Yeah. And then, like I said, there are other crates that handle like the rendering steps. So the one that I had is like, I forget what it's called, but it renders to a Tiny Skia buffer, which means you just get an array of RGBA pixels, and you can do whatever you like with them. But you'd probably be good to go with just the command line application, which will dump out XML, PNG, or whatever.
Oh no, I would link against it. It's a Rust crate. I'm pulling it in. Nice. I have 900 crates in my graph originally. Why do you think I split things by dynamic libraries? It's gotten out of control a long time ago. I think my previous strategy would have been to just make an SVG and then use an SVG rendering engine to do that. But the thing with the SVG is that it's really not made for typesetting and layouting and all that. It's much closer to something like PostScript than it is to something like Typst, I guess, because it's just put some text here, but
it's not all the way to rasterizing, but it's one step down of pre-processing or something.
There's so little you can do with formatting. Like if you place each individual character, then it's fine, right? Because it is able to pull a glyph from a font and put it somewhere, and then you can give it a font weight or something. But you can't really, in HTML, you can do a lot. You can do a lot of typography. I've never said that word out loud. Wow. But in SVG, it's very, very limited. And so, for example, the diagrams on my website right now are exported from draw.io, which is a diagramming software. And they used to be first converted to paths and then converted to SVG. So I did like PDF, paths and then SVG so that it would render exactly the same everywhere. So even letters were paths. But now I just take the SVG export from draw.io, which only displays correctly on browsers because it uses foreign object to put HTML inside the SVG so that you get stuff like line wrapping and text elements, because SVG doesn't do that. So that's how bad SVG is at this. I think it does, but you can't have bold tags and stuff. Anyway, Typst is so much better for this. I'm going to use this. Thank you, James.
I'm excited about it.
I feel like there were 2 references where I was thinking about Aladdin.
Wait, which ones?
We're keeping that in.
Yeah. When you're like, it's a whole new world. And I was like,
Oh, okay.
new world.
Don't you dare close your eyes.
Exactly.
So what's fun is that
then-
you can sing and it's going to be on the record, but you can cut it out in the edit and you can just have us be like flustered because we hear the whole new world. We're trying to be serious.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one was a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B
Oh, yeah.
for when
Exactly.
the genie, the genie song. Anyways, thank you.
I had
for
to check that flustered doesn't necessarily mean anything sexual. No, it's just confused, befuddled, in a state of panic. That's just my greatest fear as a
Wait, what is
non-native
this?
speaker of English. Flustered. I've only ever
Oh, yeah.
used flustered in a context where like you find someone a little attractive or whatever. But no, it just means confused. So I was correct.
Correct.
This episode is sponsored by Depot, the build acceleration platform that's on a mission to make all builds near instant. If you're tired of watching your builds in GitHub Actions crawl like the modern day equivalent of paint drying, give Depot's GitHub Actions runners a try. They're up to 10x faster with unlimited concurrency, faster caching, support for Linux, macOS, and Windows, and they plug right into other Depot optimizations like accelerated container image builds and remote caching for Bazel, Turbo Repo, Gradle, and more. Depot was built by developers who were tired of wasting time waiting on builds instead of shipping. It's made for teams that want to move faster and stay focused on what actually matters. That's why companies like PostHog use Depot to cut build times from over 3 hours to just 3 minutes, saving tens of thousands of build hours every week. Start your free 7-day trial at depot.dev and let them know we sent you.